I'd like to welcome all our guests, especially the members of the diplomatic corps and all the CAF representatives here. It's a great privilege to be able to co-host alongside CAF this event that is so important, focusing on the economic transformation of El Salvador and investment opportunities. We'll be speaking in more detail about investment opportunities over the next hour and a half. Now I'd like to introduce Sergio Diaz Granados, Executive President of the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, a leader and friend who has transformed the bank since he became president 3 years ago. Sergio, the floor is yours. Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here once again at the library at this opportunity to present a message about the bank's presence in El Salvador and, of course, the partnership that we have with the country to advance the dreams of Salvadorians. Special greetings to Miguel Catan, Secretary of Commerce and Investment of the Republic of El Salvador, Minister of Economy of the Republic, Maria Luisa Hayam, Jason, and all the Atlantic Council team, and of course the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. My greetings to the team at CAF, the Vice Presidents, Gianpiero Leontini, Cristiana Sinelli, Gabriel Felpeto, Antonio Silveira, Secretary General Alejandra Claros, and our representative Oscar Avalle, the panelists accompanying us today, members of the diplomatic corps, business community, investors, those following us via streaming, the media, to everyone, thank you very much. I'd like to begin with a quote by Dean Acheson. He was President Harry Truman's Secretary of State. And he said that the best environment for diplomacy and development is where there is mutual trust. Dean Acheson was also one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the Atlantic Council. El Salvador is receiving us now to host a new meeting of the Board of Directors of CAF and is the embodiment of that environment of mutual trust. It's the smallest country of Latin America, continental Latin America, but is now a source of great news for the region in terms of security, investment, economic growth, tourism, infrastructure development, quality of life. And it's also an axis that is connecting Latin America and the Caribbean with the United States, proving that we are a region that is united by history, culture, nature, and, if you will, our shared destiny. CAF was born 56 years ago in 1968 as an aspiration of the Andean countries to foster greater integration in the region and to foster sustainable development. When it began with just 6 countries, and at that time there were difficulties in our region, the United States gave us a loan. The bank began with a loan from the U.S. from AID, now known as USAID, through the Alliance for Progress. And that loan of some $15 million at 40 years, 10 years grace period, 2% per annum of the type we don't see anymore today, enabled us to launch the bank and have our first major integration project. And it sowed the seed of the importance of multilateralism for solving global problems. We are in an increasingly multipolar world that requires more multilateralism to solve problems. For that reason, CAF 30 years ago began a process of transformation. And now we have the entry of El Salvador most recently. 30 years ago, the bank decided to open up to all of Latin America. And when we say all, we mean all in the broadest sense of the word. We changed the bank's charter so the bank would no longer be Andean and become a bank of the region. Second, reaching investment grade. Last year, we had our first bond issues, beginning with just $100 million in bond issues last year. And this year, the bank has become the largest non-sovereign issuer in Latin America and the Caribbean. This year, just a month ago, I was with Gabriel Felpeto in the London Stock Exchange, ringing the bell, or rather pressing the button because it's not a bell anymore, it's a button, announcing the largest operation this year by a Latin American issuer, £1 billion to finance CAF's programs in Latin America and the Caribbean. We also, this year in Japan, celebrated the first bond issue. But additionally, we transformed our program, our operating program, over the last 30 years to become one of the most important banks in terms of infrastructure, which is a key piece of economic growth and integration. And that's how we began 30 years ago. And 3 years ago, El Salvador presented its application to enter the bank, and the process was the fastest in the history of the bank. All countries had entered under Series C category, waiting a few years to gain traction, build portfolio, and then become full members with special conditions. El Salvador jumped straight into that status of a full member, and that enabled us to start right away with a CAF team with a lead and a representative here, 2 people, and all the CAF team behind them to support the dreams of El Salvador. We've done more than 25 operations between technical assistance and loans valued at $1.5 billion for the country. I'd like to highlight 3 projects. First, a $320 million loan to finance El Salvador Vuela, a loan approved by the board of directors in Lima, Peru, and there we're going to finance the construction of the Airport of the Pacific located in the Department of La Union. It's going to be a modular airport that can be expanded as demand grows and will be part of a cluster of improvements in aerial connectivity within El Salvador to promote tourism services projects, business projects, and reinforce the cluster also of mechanical service that the country will provide not only for the Americas, but for flights going to Asia. This year, we'll also approve, or rather, we approved a loan of $145 million to strengthen Salvador's sovereignty in terms of connectivity. We're going to finance a undersea cable to connect Panama and the United States, opening up huge opportunities for digital markets. And the third initiative is also an important partnership that is a great source of pride for us. We celebrated that last October. Has to do with a debt swap for a significant chunk of El Salvador's debt. It's a debt for nature swap for the Lempa River. It's one of the most important operations that we've done in the area of debt swaps, and the first that is done for a river. There, what was enabled was a $1 billion buyback of bonds, which will generate $250 million of savings, which will then go to conservation and recovery of the Lempa River. And this was possible thanks to the trust that the U.S. deposits in CAF through the DFC, the International Finance Corporation. And with that, this solution can provide an opportunity to El Salvador to improve the protection of its natural resources. Because of all this, we recognize the great effort by the Bukele administration on the basis of the principle that without security, you cannot have development, or vice versa. Thomas Hobbes said that security is the mother of all laws. The Romans considered it the first law of the Republic, and security brings confidence. And I'd like to highlight the major effort that El Salvador has made in recent years to rebuild the bases of its economic growth. El Salvador has faced some of the most critical moments in the history of Latin America and the Caribbean. A civil war that delayed GDP growth for almost 32 years. Second, the cost of all the violence caused by gangs, which cost the country 15% of its GDP. And then the pandemic, which caused a major contraction, as it did for all countries of the region. But this country has recovered. It's resilient. And now it is among the countries with medium high income. And I think that that's where the greatest challenge lies in the partnerships we have to build together between banks and the public to consolidate that upward move. I'd like to highlight the recent upgrade by Moody's. That upgrade is a good sign of what we can do together. We'd like to, looking ahead, highlight the major effort that El Salvador has made, but also get excited about a hopeful future and bring more confidence to the U.S., make it more confident in the country, in the region, and the community of Salvadorians living in the U.S. This agenda that we're working on now and tomorrow will enable the CAF makes it possible to have the CAF board here and furthers the commitment of the bank. And we're excited to continue to do this work. Thank you very much for attending this morning. And now I'd like to introduce Miguel Catan, the Secretary of Commerce and Investments, who will take the floor next. Thank you very much.
Hola.
Hello?
Hay que prenderlo,
Oh,
dice.
you have to turn it on, they tell me.
Excelentísimo presidente Sergio Díaz Granados.
President Sergio Diaz Granados, who's a great friend to El Salvador, Honorable Executive Vice President Gian Piero Leoncini, respectable Secretary General Alejandra Claros, Distinguished Vice President for Strategic Programming, Cristiana Sinelli, esteemed Representative of El Salvador, Oscar Avalle.
No acostumbro
I don't
saludar uno por uno a los
usually
miembros
greet
de la mesa
everyone at the head table
principal,
individually, or here we have main
pero
seats,
creo que
not a
este
head
momento
table.
es muy importante
But I
y
think it's important
merece
to do
me
do
tome
so
un
this time.
tiempo
It's
para hacerlo,
worthwhile for me to take the
no
time
solamente decirme uno a
to
los
do so and not
saludos.
just say,
Era
I'm
2022,
going to echo the greetings of the person who spoke
estaba El
before me.
Salvador
In
saliendo
2022,
de la
El Salvador
recuperación
was
por la
just
pandemia.
emerging from the pandemic
Había
recovery.
iniciado unos meses antes la guerra
A few months
entre
before,
Rusia y
the war
Ucrania.
between Russia and
Toca a nosotros
Ukraine had
responsable.
started. It's not up to us to say
Sencillamente
who's
decir que
at
trajo
fault. We
grandes
just want to
problemas
say
para
that
todas las
that war
naciones
caused major
y
problems
generó
for
una
all nations
hiperinflación
in the country,
que no habíamos
caused
conocido nunca.
hyperinflation, the likes of
Ya
which we hadn't
Sergio
seen in a long time.
mencionó hartamente
Sergio
la
already
situación por la que ha
spoke
pasado El Salvador y
extensively
de dónde
about the
estamos hoy.
situation that El Salvador
Pero a mí
went
me
through
gusta
and where
siempre
we are
decir
today.
bienvenidos al nuevo El Salvador.
But I always like to say,
Este
welcome to
El
the new El
Salvador,
Salvador. This El
día
Salvador on
4 de
November
noviembre
4th,
de
2024
2024 es
is
diferente
different from the
del
El
Salvador del
Salvador
3 de
of
noviembre.
November 3rd.
Cada día estamos
Every
avanzando a pasos
day we are
agigantados
making
hacia lo que
huge
va a ser
strides
el nuevo El
towards our
Salvador
new El
para las
Salvador
nuevas
for the
generaciones.
new generations.
Y pareciera
It might seem
utópico
utopian
pensar que un país
to
tan
believe
pequeño
it
como el
that
nuestro,
such a small
después de haber
country,
sufrido los
after
embates
having
de la violencia
suffered
de
the
distintos tipos,
ravages of different
primero
types of
por una guerra
violence,
fratricida
first the
que costó
fratricidal
no solamente
war
muchas vidas,
that
sino
not
que
only cost a great deal of
la falta de
lives,
crecimiento del
but meant a
Salvador,
lack of growth
la
in El
destrucción
Salvador, the
absoluta del
absolute
agro salvadoreño
destruction
para llegar
of
de ser el
Salvadorian
país
agriculture,
más productivo en la región a ser el país que importa el
which took
80%,
us from being the most productive country in the region to being a
generándonos
country that had to import
tremendísima,
80% of what we
tremendísima
eat, which
vulnerabilidad en
caused
cuanto a la seguridad
tremendous
alimentaria,
vulnerability in
a
terms
ser un
of
país que
food
ve el
security.
futuro de
Right
una
now, we're a
forma
country who
promisoria.
sees a very promising
A
future.
veces yo me
I
despierto
wake
cada
up every
mañana
morning
pensando con
thinking,
qué nos sorprenderá
what
El
is El
Salvador,
Salvador going to surprise us with next?
con qué sorprenderá Dios a El
What is
Salvador, a este país que lleva
God
el nombre de
going
su
to
Hijo,
surprise El Salvador
para
with?
un
El Salvador
futuro
named
mejor
after his
para nuestras
son,
nuevas
the
generaciones.
Savior.
Y cada
What will
día
he bring
podemos
for a
ver
better future for
no
new
solamente algo
generations?
nuevo, sino que algo mejor.
Every day we see
Cada
something not
día
only new,
podemos
but
ver
something
cómo El
better.
Salvador
Every day
va
we see
creciendo
how El
y va
Salvador is
teniendo
growing
las puertas abiertas hacia la
and
inversión
its doors are
extranjera y hacia la
opening to
inversión local.
foreign and
Por
local
primera vez,
investment.
el año
For
pasado
the first
logramos
time last
el más
year,
grande
we saw the highest levels
índice de inversión extranjera
of
directa,
foreign direct
pero también
investment,
logramos un
but we
altísimo
also
índice
achieved
de
very high
reinversión
levels of
local.
local
Esperamos que
reinvestment. And
2024
we hope that
el índice sea todavía mayor.
2024 will see even higher levels.
Estamos viendo nuevos proyectos cada día,
Every day we're
proyectos
seeing new
habitacionales,
projects, housing
proyectos
projects,
industriales,
industrial
proyectos
projects,
comerciales,
commercial
proyectos
projects,
logísticos,
logistical
pero
projects.
también el gobierno está
But at the same
apostándole a
time, the
crear la
government is
infraestructura
pushing to
necesaria
create the
para lograr que
infrastructure
esas
needed to
inversiones
ensure that those
generen
investments
ganancias
will
y el
generate
lucro que los
earnings,
inversionistas
the
necesitan.
profits that investors need.
Nadie trabaja solo para estar
Nobody
cansado
works
e
just to be
invierte solo
tired,
para
and
decir que
nobody
tiene dinero.
invests just to say they have money.
Se trabaja para recibir
People work
recompensa y se
to
invierte
earn
para recibir lucro.
compensation, and
Nosotros
people
somos un
invest to
país que
receive
está
profits. And we're a country
garantizando
that is
100%
ensuring
la inversión
100%
extranjera, la
foreign
inversión
investment,
nacional, la propiedad
national
privada y el
investment,
respeto
private property, and full respect to family values in El Salvador. So we keep improving, we keep creating the necessary conditions to ensure legal certainty, but also physical safety to ensure connectivity in terms of communications, but also to ensure connectivity and infrastructure and logistical mobility. We continue to make progress in terms of our customs and our borders, which are the most modern in the Central American region, but also to have the best airport in the region, the only one certified to operate reliably. We are the country with the brightest future in all of the Latin American region. We don't have the riches that other countries have, but we have stability, which is what is needed for growth. Now, happily, we can see how other countries in the region are seeking security and legal certainty as well. And we believe that together we can make a real change and become what we always should have been, the greatest region in the world. Latin America has a great future. El Salvador has a very clear future, a future of stability and safety. So welcome to El Salvador. Welcome to investing in our country. Welcome to the certainty that your investments will be respected here. And welcome to a country that ensures your physical safety as no other country does and has never done before. Thank you very much, and may God bless you.
Señoras y señores, por favor, demos la
Ladies and
bienvenida
gentlemen,
al
let's
escenario
welcome
a
to the
Jason
stage
Marzak,
Jason Marzak,
vicepresidente y
Vice
director
President
senior
and
del
Senior
Centro
Director of
Adrienne
the
Arsht
Adrienne
para
Arsht
América
Latin
Latina del
America
Atlantic Council,
Center
a la
of the
ministra
Atlantic
de
Council,
Economía del
to the
Salvador,
Minister of the
María
Economy
Luisa
of El
Hayem,
Salvador, Maria Luisa
acompañados por
Hayam,
el secretario José
accompanied
Miguel
by
Catán y el
Secretary
presidente de
Jose
CAF,
Miguel
Sergio
Catan
Díaz
and the
Granados, para
President
tomar
of
una
CAF,
foto
Sergio Diaz
oficial
Granados, to
antes de
take
dar
an
inicio
official
a la
photo
primera
before
conversación del día.
starting our first conversation of the day.
Thank you, Miguel Catan and President Sergio Diaz Granados, for your opening remarks. For me, it's a great privilege to be sitting here next to the Ministry of the Economy, Maria Luisa Hayem, who has been the minister since 2019, quite a long time, and she's had many achievements. Minister, it's even a greater privilege because I have always had the opportunity to talk with her in different cities around the world, where she is always promoting the economy of El Salvador. So even better to be here with her in El Salvador. We're going to talk in the next few minutes about your perspective on where El Salvador's economy is going, what your achievements have been, what your vision is for the future of the economy. And I wanted to start from your appointment with respect to leading several initiatives to reactivate and modernize the country's economy. As Secretary Catan talked about some of these initiatives. So if you can share your vision for the economic development of the country and also the main strategies that you have been implementing to achieve more sustainable growth. Thank you, Jason. Good morning to all of you. It's an honor to be here with Jason, with whom we have been meeting in different international fora to share the transformation El Salvador is going through today, a transformation in security and quality of life, in the business climate, in infrastructure. In short, a lot has happened in El Salvador, and we can't keep that to ourselves. The world should know about this. And so we've been with Jason many times before. I'd like to highlight something that I believe has been very useful for El Salvador, and to be able to move forward in creating a solid basis for economic growth that is sustained over time. That is inclusive, of course, but it is also sustainable and in harmony with our environment and that integral vision of everything that has to happen in our country. And it has to happen because it's really a work in progress, as they say. We are building an ecosystem, and I believe this is one of the most important elements. Since the beginning of our administration, we have identified 12 areas that in the past that have been hindrances to the economic development of our country. But today I'm not going to go into each of those, but I will mention some of them: an obsolete regulatory framework, red tape, and bureaucracy. That was after the security issue, one of the greatest hindrances to the growth of our companies, from the smallest to multinational companies. A lack of alignment between labor supply and demand, a lack of efficiency in customs, and I could talk about other obstacles that made El Salvador continue to have economic stagnation that lasted for too long and did not bring employment opportunities to our people. So having a clear north where we need to go and knowing what the obstacles have been, well, this has been key. Now, to answer your question, Jason, what has had a catalytic effect in the short term? Of course, I cannot fail to mention the security aspect. I'm not the Minister of Justice or Defense or Security, but it has been a factor that allows us to have greater interest from investors who can travel to El Salvador today. They can put El Salvador on their short list of countries where they would like to expand. So security has been vital from the outset. We have seen an immediate impact on our micro entrepreneurs, for example, who could not sell their products outside their houses because it was not profitable, it was dangerous. And we've seen that on a larger scale. We've seen that with distribution companies that went from having extremely high costs for the distribution of their products. We can see in those graphs how from one day to the next, the cost has become zero. Security has been vital, and the effort to create a business climate to modernize a regulatory framework, trade facilitation. I would say that those are the first barriers we have eliminated, and that has triggered greater investment in the short term. Minister, on the subject of trade facilitation, it's been a year since El Salvador started implementing the National Trade Facilitation Strategy. Can you share a little about the progress there? It's a 4-year plan, I think, a plan for up to 2027. So what have been the progress made in this strategy during the last year? Well, our work in trade facilitation has been comprehensive, Jason. We have not limited ourselves to the customs piece, for example, which is already covered in our international treaties, specifically with respect to the WTO. We have taken a very broad approach. We're talking about customs, but we're also talking about internal procedures. We're talking about interoperability, interconnection, integration with neighboring countries, specifically Honduras and Guatemala, and the area of infrastructure. We can have agile procedures, advances in the regulatory framework, but if we do not have infrastructure and speed and customs. We will not mix a maximum level of trade facilitation. So since October 2019, we set upon doing this. We have 17 government institutions, 7 associations from the business sector, and 120 actions we have completed. We've made important alliances with the World Economic Forum. We have a partnership to be able to measure all the progress we are making in our work on trade facilitation, but it's very important to be able to identify where there are still challenges and what we need to do to resolve them. Year after year, we establish our annual plans that will allow us to achieve the strategy that Jason mentioned at our last meeting in August of this year. We already made 86.6% of progress with our strategy. And to give you an example of these achievements, I would like to remind you that the ultimate goal of this trade facilitation strategy is to become one of the most competitive and trade facilitated countries in Latin America. We have been quite ambitious, and one of the major milestones we have already achieved is the creation of our sanitary regulatory superintendent, which had inefficiencies in the past. We've taken an innovative model to ensure that the food sector and the medicine sector has an agile way of obtaining registrations and authorizations. But perhaps the grand scheme of all of this, all the work we're doing, is the partnership to modernize our ports with the port company Yieldport. It's really a great milestone because in the next few years, we will be seeing modernization and increase in the capacity of our 2 ports, the port of La Unión and also the port of Acajutla, and this will have a triggering effect for greater investment in our country. Speaking about the ports and also airports and the conversation you've been having throughout the country, this plan has ambitious integration goals as well. Can you talk about this, goals with Honduras and Guatemala, integrated border posts? This is part of the strategy and key for integration of the economy of these 3 countries. Can you talk about this? That's right, Jason. It is extremely important that just as we make progress with respect to our trade facilitation efforts and the modernization of our customs, our ports, and have more modern ports, as mentioned before, it is important. But for El Salvador to become more attractive and more competitive, the work we do with Honduras and Guatemala is vital. There are 6 border posts that we share with Honduras and Guatemala, 2 with Honduras, 4 with Guatemala, and to the extent we can be more integrated, to the extent that costs are reduced and time is reduced, we are more likely to have partnerships. There are going to be more value chains between our companies in Central America. So in the last few years, I would say we have reached a level of progress that has not been seen or was not seen in the prior 10 years. An example of this is that on December 7th, we, together with the government of Honduras, hope to celebrate our first year of the first integrated border post. Who would have thought that El Salvador would have an integrated border post with Honduras, where Honduran customs, migration, and agricultural officials would become part of a single team in a single border post on the El Salvador side, where today companies are feeling the benefit and the positive impact of reduced costs thanks to the efficiencies that are being achieved today. This is one of 6 border posts, but I would like to highlight the fact that in recent years, we have also taken on the task of adopting the Advanced Declaration, which is a technological platform that enables us to leverage technology to facilitate the border crossing of goods. So we're going step by step. It is a gigantic task in which different government institutions of different countries, well, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador have to be in agreement to move forward. Minister, I would also like to ask you about a law that came into effect last year, the law for the promotion of innovation in technological manufacturing. It is important to provide tax incentives to bring more investment to the country, especially to the technology sector. If you can compare some of the achievements with respect to the implementation of this law in the last year, what are some of the obstacles and how you're working to overcome them? Yes, I spoke about the importance of modernizing our regulatory framework, and one of the laws that was adopted, working jointly with the legislature, was this law to promote innovation in technological manufacturing. Today, 1 year after it came into force, I can tell you that it has had a catalytic impact on investment in our country. Last week, I saw there were 34 companies that are already covered by this new law. I was reviewing the data for this session. I saw that now there are 37 companies. So the number of companies that today see El Salvador as the place to establish themselves in the technology sector, which is one of our priority sectors, as is, of course, tourism and manufacturing. This has been increasing day by day. So that's good news. There is diversification in terms of the origins of where these companies are from. We're talking about Salvadoran companies, also companies from the US and Canada, Europe, and South America. So that's good terms with respect to diversification of the origins of where tech companies are coming from. Having said that, there are two things I would like to highlight. First, is the fact that this law made it possible for companies like Data Trust, one of the most modern data centers in Central America, in Latin America as well. Well, it made it possible for the company to invest $30 million, and it has opened its doors this year to provide services in El Salvador and internationally. So the impact of regulation is important, but I also want to highlight that the law has a positive impact because now there is an environment that complements the regulatory framework. And when we talk about 37 tech companies, there are many other companies not covered by this law, but they are establishing themselves in our country. Last year, Jason, there were 3,341 new companies created in our economy. By October of this year, we surpassed that number, and we're talking about 4,400 companies, and that's from January to October of this year. So the impact is incredible. These are incredible numbers, Minister, that number of companies. And at the Atlantic Council, we have a working group dedicated to the issue of nearshoring, and we have talked about the importance of this kind of tax incentives to attract even more investments to the country, and also what else the United States can do for incentives to push investment. So these laws are key. We have a few more minutes, and I would like to ask you, when you are thinking about the future, we talked about the national strategy, the competitiveness law, and your vision. But when you're looking at the next few years, what is your vision regarding the key sectors to prioritize for investment and development? Well, I mentioned before that the tourism sector is a sector that's very important for our government. Today, El Salvador is the third fastest growing country in the tourism sector in the world, as the Minister of Tourism says, not in Latin America, not in Central America, but in the world. So we're going to capitalize on El Salvador's position today in the sector, that connection with our diaspora that also contributes to the growth of tourism in such a significant way. The tech sector, of course, is very important. We have partnerships, for example, with Google, and This is a large or giant technology company that has decided to invest in El Salvador. And of course, we also mentioned the law that has been so important. And manufacturing is very important. It's one of our traditional sectors that is already positioned well on the global stage. But we're also talking about the sector of auto parts. There is interesting demand projected in the future for that sector. That's something that El Salvador is working on to benefit from. And then there's the issue of services, the aviation sector, the aeronautical sector. We think that we have a great deal of potential there. We are positioning ourselves on the world stage, and we have talent that can help the aviation sector continue to grow, especially now. We're going to have a new airport. We're preparing ourselves to take advantage of our people's talent. We will have a multinational airport, and we are going to have a pipeline of people that can be integrated into the aeronautical sector at a global level. Well, Minister, thank you very much. Congratulations for all your achievements, for your vision regarding the economy and all the companies that are coming here to the country, and the vision you have had in recent years to accelerate the economy in a sustainable manner with a medium and long-term vision. Thank you, Jason. I didn't want to end without saying that we have not done this alone. There has been great collaboration with the business sector. On a daily basis, we've been working together. I'd also like to mention the importance and the role played by multilateral organizations in this effort. El Salvador is at a privileged moment. In the first 5 years of our government's administration, we've been able to implement strategic plans, and multilateral organizations have deposited their trust in our country. In the future, much of the work we will be doing will just be the execution of strategies already in place. One more question. What is the main obstacle the country faces? Well, let's see. El Salvador is a country that is very interconnected with the world, and we are subject to and we are impacted by wars that are happening throughout the world, and also by the fluctuation of inputs, for example, oil, petroleum. So that is the main challenge the economy of El Salvador is facing. And it is the challenge that most economies in the world face. And something else, which is not just really a challenge, but an opportunity, and that is to continue to work on the alignment of labor supply and demand. We have companies today that want to grow. They have new contracts to make their businesses grow, and we are working jointly to make sure that this talent is available to companies and that the lack of talent is not a hindrance to growth. Because in the end, as everyone knows, talent is our most valued asset, our most precious asset, productive, dedicated talent that learns quickly and is worth extra money. In CAF, we're going to be working very hard because that is where we see the key to growth in the immediate term, but also in the long term, because that is where we're going to be working very hard. We're going to be working hard in the short, medium, and long term. This is key. Thank you very much, Minister. Now I would like to continue the conversation with some experiences from the business sector, and I wanted to invite to the stage Rodrigo Ayala, Sean Sullivan, Sofia Corral, Carmen Aida Munoz, and this will be moderated by Maria Fernanda Bosmosky. Thank you.
Ay, ya me acordé. Qué gusto verlo. Qué bueno, verla. Sí, igualmente. Sí, ay, no hubiéramos podido quedar 1000 horas ahí hablando.
Uso el micrófono. Gracias, Jason.
Thank you,
Gracias
Jason.
a
Thank
nuestros
you to our
coanfitriones y
co-hosts
colegas
at
del
the
Banco
Development Bank
de
of
Desarrollo
Latin
de
America
América
and the
del Caribe,
Caribbean,
CAF.
CAF.
Y gracias a todos los que
And
están
thank you
aquí
to everyone
presentes
who's here
en
with
el
us
auditorio
in
de
the
la Biblioteca
auditorium of
Nacional
the
de El
National
Salvador.
Library of El
Es
Salvador.
verdaderamente un
It's
gusto estar
truly a
en El
pleasure
Salvador
to
después
be
de
here in
más
El
de 5
Salvador after
años
more than 5
y ver
years
todos los
and
cambios
to
que
see all the
sucedieron.
changes that
Me
have taken
acompañan aquí en el
place.
escenario.
Sharing the stage with
No
me,
tienen necesidad de
well, they
introducción.
don't really need an introduction, but I'll introduce them anyway.
Rodrigo
We have Rodrigo
Ayala,
Ayala, the
presidente de la
president of the
Agencia
Agency for the Promotion of Investment in Exports in El Salvador, Invest El Salvador.
Sean Sullivan,
Sean Sullivan,
quien es director
General
general
Director
y
and
jefe de
Chief
Asuntos
of Government
Gubernamentales para América
Affairs for
Latina
Latin America and the
del Caribe y
Caribbean
el Caribe
at
de Citi,
Citi,
también un miembro corporativo
which
del
is also a
Centro
corporate
Adrienne.
member of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center.
Sofía Corral,
Sofia
directora de
Corral,
comunicaciones
Director of Corporate
corporativas de
Communications at
Millicom, y
Millicom,
Carmen Aida
and
Muñoz,
Carmen Aida
directora
Munoz,
ejecutiva
Executive
de
Director of
El
AmCham
Salvador.
El Salvador.
Ahora, en los próximos más o
Now, over
menos
the
20
next 20
minutos
minutes or
vamos a
so,
hablar del panorama actual de
we're going to
inversiones,
look at
de
the overall
desarrollo,
investment
de la
environment,
experiencia de ustedes
and
como
I'm interested in
empresarios,
hearing
inversionistas
your
en El
experience
Salvador.
as
Vamos a hablar un
entrepreneurs and
poco también de los
investors.
retos y desafíos, o
We'd
como
like to talk
decía la
about
señora
the
ministra, las
challenges or
oportunidades
opportunities,
para
as the
mejorar
minister
la
said, to
inversión
improve the
también
investment climate
aquí en El
here
Salvador.
in El Salvador.
Como ya se ha hablado esta
As was
mañana,
already discussed this
estamos en un
morning,
contexto
we're in a
marcado por
context marked
reformas
by economic
económicas importantes,
reform,
avances en temas de
significant
seguridad,
progress
una
in security
apuesta
matters,
por parte
and
del
a
país
move by
a
the
la
country
modernización
toward
tecnológica
technological
eh,
modernization,
que se ha visto aquí en El Salvador.
as we see
Entonces,
here in El Salvador.
quisiera que compartan sus
So
visiones,
I'd like you to share
desafíos
your
y
views on the
oportunidades.
challenges and
Quisiera
opportunities.
empezar con una
And
pregunta
I'd like
que
to
se la voy a
begin with a
hacer a todos
question,
ustedes
which I'll
cuatro,
pose
empezando
to
por
all four
Carmen.
of you, starting with you, Carmen.
¿Cómo
How would
describirías
you
el clima para la
describe the
inversión
current
en El
investment
Salvador
climate here in El
para
Salvador?
compañías? ¿Cuáles
What
son
do you believe
las
are the
ventajas
most
que están trayendo
attractive factors that
a
are bringing
este clima?
companies to invest in this country?
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Seguridad. Muchas
Yes,
empresas,
security.
como todos los
Many
inversionistas,
companies, all
cuando hacen
investors,
su debida
when
diligencia
they do their due
en el país
diligence
en el que invierten,
to
tienen
decide where
que
to invest,
analizar cuál es el clima de
have to
seguridad en el país y
analyze
en El
the
Salvador.
security
Eso ha
climate,
mejorado
and
sustancialmente y es
El
un punto
Salvador has made
en el que
substantial improvements.
El Salvador
So
se ha
that's really a
mejorado.
point in
El
favor.
segundo es la desregularización.
Second
El Salvador
would
ha
be
mejorado mucho en el tema de facilitación de
deregulation.
comercio, como lo
There, a lot
mencionaba
has
la
been done in
ministra
terms
de
of trade
Economía,
facilitation,
en el
as the
tema de
Minister of the Economy
digitalización
said,
de sus procesos.
and also the
Hablamos de
digitalization of
digitalización,
processes.
muchos de los procesos, los
Many
servicios gubernamentales se pueden hacer en línea
government
y
services
esto
can be done
facilita y reduce
online
los costos transaccionales.
now, and that reduces transaction costs.
Falta por hacer porque son muchos los
There remains more to be done because there are a
pero
lot of
ya se ha
government services,
iniciado y hay un gran avance.
but a lot has
Esto
been
se ha hecho
done.
a través del fortalecimiento del diálogo
This has been done
público-privado.
through a
Y creo que
strengthening
el
of
diálogo
public-private
público-privado
dialogue.
ha
Public-private
venido
dialogue
desarrollándose a través
has
de
been taking
diferentes
place
ministerios y las diferentes
via the different
instituciones del gobierno.
ministries
Y
and
el tercer
government
punto que veo
agencies. And then the third
es
point I
a
see
través de Invest, que lo dirige aquí
has
el
to do
señor
with
Ayala.
Invest, which is led
Vemos
by our colleague here,
ministros o
Mr. Ayala.
dirigentes de instituciones,
So when
presidentes
you
de
have
gobierno,
ministers or
que
leaders of
realmente
autonomous agencies being
son
technical
políticos,
experts
que
and not
realmente saben
politicians,
qué es lo que el
when they
inversionista
really
busca
know what
y cómo
investors are
dirigirlo,
looking for and
esa
how
es
to
una seguridad
target
que se da
that,
al inversionista.
that
El
provides
inversionista
certainty to investors.
que anda viendo a dónde
An
coloca su
investor
inversión
deciding
o a dónde coloca
where to invest or where to place a supply chain, maybe looking in El Salvador or Costa Rica, or we'll be looking in Colombia.
Un tema de incentivos,
So it's a matter of incentives,
son tres elementos lo que el inversionista
security. That is what
tres elementos.
they're looking for. And when all the elements are in place, I'll talk about challenges later, but when the positives are there,
Confianza, seguridad
trust,
ciudadana, porque la seguridad
citizen security, because that's something that
operacional de
carries an operational cost for businesses.
considerarlo al momento de hacer negocios, porque es
That
el
has to be
alcance
taken into
de
account
hasta dónde puede llegar el
when deciding where to do business.
tema de distribución o el tema de servicios. Y en el tema de
And in the
el red tape,
issue of bureaucracy and red tape.
o no. Y hasta aquí me quedo.
And I'll just stop there.
Querida Sofía,
Thank you. What about you, Sophia?
sí, buenos días. ¿Me escuchan bien ahí?
Can you hear me?
En el caso de Tigo, hace
In the
32
case of
años
Tigo, our company has been in the country for 32 years.
todo lo que es desarrollo de infraestructura
And everything that
requiere
involves
inversión
infrastructure
a
development
largo plazo.
requires long-term investment. So it's not a matter of an investor coming along and after 5 years reevaluating their investment.
Digamos, no hay desarrollo en
There could be no
sin
infrastructure
una visión a
development
largo
without a
plazo.
long-term
No
vision.
hay conectividad
And there
sin esa
can't
visión
be
a largo plazo.
connectivity without that long-term vision, because investment is
Porque la
ongoing,
tecnología
because
avanza, porque la
technology keeps
necesidad de los
advancing,
salvadoreños y del mundo es estar conectados
and
digitalmente.
Salvadorans and
Entonces,
the
para
world, they need to
nosotros
be
es
connected
fundamental
digitally. So
primer
it's
punto esa
really
mirada a largo
important,
plazo
first and
en el tema
foremost,
de
to have that
inversión.
long-term vision as regards investment.
Mencionaba y la
Carmen
ministra,
already mentioned it, and so did the
la
minister.
digitalización sin
You
infraestructura.
can't have digitalization
Entonces,
without
digamos,
infrastructure.
ahí empieza
So that's where all
continúa
it
desarrollándose
starts,
esa
and where
colaboración
you have
pública-privada,
to have that
porque
public-private
la
partnership,
digitalización
because
llegó para quedarse.
digitalization
Quizás
is here to stay.
suena vieja, pero
The
fue
pandemic sounds like
un
old
hito
news, but it
en
really
la
marked a
transformación
milestone in
digital.
terms of digital
Entonces,
transformation.
ese trabajo
So
conjunto
that joint
de agenda
effort
digital
around the digital agenda, that has worked very
y creo
well.
que
And
es
I
una
think
prueba
that
de que
it
el sector
proves
público y privado
that the
deben
public
trabajar
and
de la
private
mano
sectors
para
should
trabajar
continue to work hand in
mejorar la
hand
vida
to
de los
improve
ciudadanos.
the lives of
Antes
citizens.
por ahí requería
It used to
días
take
hacer algún tipo de
days to
proceso
do certain
y
kinds of
hacerlo desde la casa
procedures. And now
parece
if you can
algo
do it
sencillo,
from
pero
home,
atrás
it would
hay
seem simple, but
realmente
behind that
hay acuerdo
is a
público-privado,
lot
hay
of
inversión.
private-public
Entonces,
coordination and
me parece
investment.
que esto es súper
So,
importante.
in fact, I think that that
Mencionaba,
is
¿no?
super
Tigo está hace
important.
32
As I
años
just
acá.
said, Tigo
En los
has been
últimos
here
5
for
años
32 years. In the last 5
invertido más
years,
de 500
it has
millones
invested more than
de
$500
dólares y
million,
hoy conecta
and it now
hasta
connects
3 millones
3
de
million
salvadoreños.
Salvadorians.
Eso sin una agenda en común
That,
es
without
difícil
a
de
common
lograr.
agenda, is
Y
very
otro
difficult to
punto
achieve.
también
And
para cerrar
another
que me parece importante
point,
es la
just to wrap up, a point I
previsibilidad,
think is
¿no? La
important, is
seguridad jurídica.
predictability
Esto, digamos,
and
tener
legal
realmente
certainty.
en claro
We
cuáles son las
need
decisiones
to understand very clearly what the
que se toman en el
regulatory and
sector
legal decisions
y
are that are being taken
realmente
in the
que
sector,
sean en pos del
and they
ciudadano
need to
final,
be to
me
the
parece que
benefit
es
of
un punto
the
muy
citizens.
importante
That is a
a la
very
hora de
important
tanto
point
un
in
desafío y una
my point
oportunidad
of view. And there it's a
a la hora
challenge
de
and an
poder seguir
opportunity as
desarrollando la
well
infraestructura
in
de
terms of continuing
telecomunicaciones.
to develop telecommunications infrastructure.
¿Qué dirías?
What would you say? Is this working? Yes. I'm very thankful for the opportunity. Here, Sean, it wasn't working. I was speaking with some friends that I was going to come here. I was here back in 2007, 2008. At that time, I was working here, and this was when President Bukele was a mayor. So from the perspective of city, looking back 30 years,
How's this? Okay, sorry. Entonces tenemos un compromiso fuerte con este país.
So we have a strong commitment with this
Hemos estado
country.
acá, como dije, por 60
We've
años.
been
Y para
here
nosotros,
60 years now.
obviamente para nosotros el clima de
Obviously,
inversión
for
es
us, the
sumamente
investment climate
importante. Y yo
is
creo que como yo estoy
very
basado en
important.
Washington, yo cubro toda América
So
Latina.
from
Hay
Washington,
pocos
I cover all
países
of Latin
donde yo
America, and
veo
I can see
una
that there
región
are
que está
few
tan
countries in
enfocado
the
con este
region that
gobierno
as
en
focused
mejorar el clima
as
de
this
inversión
government is in improving
y
the
hacer todo
investment
lo
climate
necesario para
and
atraer
doing
inversión.
everything it takes
Para
to attract
nosotros eso es
investment.
sumamente
And
importante.
for
Creo
us,
que
that is
El
highly
Salvador está
important.
muy bien posicionado
El
para el
Salvador is
futuro.
very well
Creo que el
positioned
tema de
for the
nearshoring
future. I think the issue of
sí es
nearshoring
verdadero y ahí es
is
donde El Salvador sí puede
real. That's where
aprovechar.
El
Y
Salvador
yo
could
creo
really
que
take
trabajando
advantage.
junto con el
And I
gobierno, el
think
sector
that
privado y otros grupos,
collaboration
tenemos la
between the
oportunidad
public and private
realmente
sector and other groups, we
cambiar las
really have
cosas.
an
Obviamente el
opportunity
tema
to
de seguridad
change
en este
things.
país ha sido
Obviously, the issue
duro,
of
pero el
security
gobierno ha hecho
has
un
been
trabajo increíble, que es un modelo
it was tough here, but they've done an
latinoamericano.
incredible
Pero yo creo
job.
que ahora el enfoque que ha dicho el presidente Bukele de
And
crecer la
President
economía,
Bukele's
atraer
focus on
inversión y
growing
ver
the
cómo
economy,
el país puede
attracting
beneficiar
investment, and
más de
seeing how the
nearshoring. Hay
country could
muchas
benefit
conexiones
more
con,
from
de aquí a Estados
nearshoring,
Unidos, con
given the
con
connections
CAFTA-PR,
uh,
es sumamente importante. Entonces yo
between
estoy muy
El
positivo
Salvador and
sobre
the
el futuro
US
de este
and CAFTA
país. Y
DR.
creo que
Because of all of
trabajando
that, I'm
juntos
very
podemos hacer cosas
optimistic about the future and can look
Rodrigo,
forward
le
to
tengo una pregunta,
working
pero
on it.
voy a
Rodrigo,
también hacerte,
same question,
voy a agregarte una.
but I'm
Sé
going to
que
add one.
has estado teniendo reuniones con inversionistas
You've had meetings with
que están
investors.
interesados en el país. ¿Podrías
What
compartir
are they interested in?
con alguno de los sectores que más
Or could you share a bit about one of the sectors that's most interesting to investors?
Probando. Hola, buenos
Testing?
días. Un
Hi.
gusto estar con ustedes acá
It's a
presentes
pleasure
en
to be
este
here
ilustre panel
with
también.
you with
Veo
this
muchas caras conocidas y
illustrious
públicas y
panel. I
con
see a
gusto
lot
estar
of
nuevamente compartiendo.
familiar faces. Happy
Bueno,
to
creo
see you
yo que
here.
la mayoría de acá estamos enterados de
I
los
think most of
beneficios de
us
invertir en El
understand the
Salvador, de
benefits of
ecosistema que se tiene,
investing
por llamarlo de
in
alguna
El
manera, del activo
Salvador with the
fijo que tiene El
ecosystem that it
Salvador,
has and the
desde
fixed
la mano de
assets
obra
that
hasta,
El
y por
Salvador
supuesto
has
es un desafío
from
que
its
vamos a hablar más en
workforce.
detalle,
And of
pero
course,
ahorita
yes,
viéndolo
there's
desde
a
el punto de vista
challenge there too,
del
but
vaso
starting
medio
by
lleno, el activo fijo que
looking
tenemos
at the positive,
positivo,
we
los
have that
beneficios, el marco
positive
estructural
fixed
de ley
asset,
que se tiene para
the
diferentes sectores,
regulatory framework
pero
for different
hay algo
sectors.
clave que el
But there's
presidente
something
también ha dado
key
como
that the
lineamiento en
president
este quinquenio,
has
y es
focused on in this
reforzar el ejemplo
5-year
económico.
period,
¿Y cómo se hace eso?
reinforcing
Por
the
ejemplo, para una
economy.
agencia
How
que
do
se
you do
dedica a la
that? For an
promoción de las
agency
inversiones
devoted to
y las
promoting investment
exportaciones, es
and
sencillo
exports
como hablar el mismo
like
lenguaje
ours,
que
it's
los
as simple as
inversores.
speaking the same language
No
as
hablar el
investors,
lenguaje que históricamente y sin
not
politizar
speaking the
la cuestión.
language
Porque como lo
of the
decía mi
past
querida
without
amiga
over
Carmen Aida, se trata de tener
politicizing the
técnicos y
response,
políticos
because, as
pues
was
clave
said, it's important to
económicos.
have technical experts and not
Sin
politicians
politizar
in
la
key
respuesta,
positions. So, without
ese
politicizing the
lenguaje que se
response,
tiene que compartir del
you have
empleado
to have that
público,
shared
funcionario público
language
con el
between
posible
public
inversor,
officials and
tal
potential
vez no se había tenido de
investors.
una buena
And
manera en el
perhaps
pasado, tal vez en
that wasn't
algunas
handled
épocas
so
sí,
well in the
pero en
past.
otras no.
Perhaps in some
Y
periods,
dejando
yes,
eso
but in
atrás,
others
lo que
not.
debe
But
de
leaving
quedar
that behind
ahora en adelante de lo que se trata de hablar
in
es
the
el mismo
rearview
lenguaje
mirror,
que
now we
conocer
need
las
to focus on
necesidades y
speaking
todo
the same
parte de algo
language,
tan
understanding the
sencillo
needs.
como entender
It
que
can be something as simple
todo
as
se regula por
understanding
oferta y demanda.
that everything is
Nosotros
governed
no
by
podemos
supply and
esperar
demand.
vender a
We
El
cannot
Salvador
expect to
con
sell
mensajes
El Salvador
cualitativos. Tenemos
with
también que vender a El
qualitative
Salvador con
messages.
mensaje
We have
cuantitativo.
to come
¿Qué es
with
lo que tenemos?
quantitative
¿Cómo se va
messages.
a ver
What do
reflejado
we
ese
have?
mensaje cuantitativo
And how
en los
does
estados
that
financieros del empresario
get
o del futuro
reflected
inversor?
in
Que al
the
final el inversor se va
financial
a mover por
statements of
eso,
a company? Because
por
that's what
cómo su
investments
inversión
are
va a ser
interested in, how
redituable
its
o no lo va a ser.
investment is
Tan
going to work.
sencillo
Will it be
como eso.
profitable or not? It's that
Así que al
simple.
hablar ese mismo idioma, al
So
tener
if you
ese
speak
mismo
the same
lenguaje,
language,
compartir esa misma
use the
visión
same
como
terms, you
empresario,
share the same vision as the
acompañándote en el
entrepreneur,
caso, por ejemplo,
and
de profesionales de la
if
inversión
you're
privada
working with
que han pasado ahora al
private
servicio
sector
público por
specialists who
sentimiento
have now
patriótico
joined the
también
public
y quieren
service out
ayudar a
of
su nación y
patriotism. They
ayudar
want
a
to
su
help
nación a
their
crecer,
country. They want
entonces
to
ese
see their
lenguaje se
country
convierte en
grow.
efectivo
And
y
that
al final
really
el
becomes
inversor
an
puede encontrar la respuesta
asset.
que necesita o
And
que busca
investors get the
de la manera que
answers
quiera
that they
quedar
need. They
dentro de
can
una
get the
agencia de promoción
clarification
como lo
they
es
need
Invest.
within
Ahora,
a
hablando de
promotion agency
sectores,
like
aquellos
ours, like
sectores que han
Invest.
sido
Now, looking at
mayormente
specific sectors,
atraídos por
sectors
El Salvador y por
that
su
have
ecosistema, el
felt
sector
most
de tecnología,
attracted
por
by
ejemplo,
the
por el marco
ecosystem
legal que
here,
tenemos nosotros
technology,
para la
because of
tecnología y
the
la
regulatory framework we have, manufacturing as well as tourism. Because as a positive consequence of the safety, the security we have now, perhaps last year we had 3.4 million tourists coming into the country. And if you look at that, taking into account that we are just about 6 million inhabitants, we're talking about the equivalent of half the population coming through as tourists. What does that mean? Tourism is booming. We have a deficit of hotel rooms, 6,000 per night, that we can't cover. In high season, we are fully booked. And that's not just the big hotel chains. We're talking about small hotels too. And so we have to help that sector with solutions like Airbnb, for instance, because the installed capacity of the country is not sufficient. So talking security, but also taking that into numbers and bringing to a potential investor, you have guaranteed success. Why? Because the demand is here. Don't believe me, believe the numbers. The demand is here. If you set up a hotel here, you can be assured that you'll be filling those beds. So if you have the data, if you have the statistics, and you can share it with potential investors, that's the success that they're looking for, that we're looking for. Success for us is having these tools, having the data and the figures, and being able to speak the same language and sharing the goals of the investors so that they feel as they should, right at home. Thank you. And in fact, we saw that issue with the shortage of hotel rooms because the Atlantic Council team is spread across various hotels. Okay, Carmen, I'm going to ask you about the challenges now with the time we have left. You have many partners, 17,500 direct employees. Oh, 175,000. I got the comma wrong. So tell us about the main demands and needs that you're hearing about.
Well, I'll try to be brief. What investors are asking for are clear rules and consultation processes under the laws. And there's another one, and the government's working on that, which is the informal sector. The informal sector in Latin America accounts for between 70 and 80% of the economy. The informal sector has to be formalized, and we need to find a way for these people to pay taxes. We need to broaden the scope of taxes and taxpayers. It can't be that just large companies are being taxed because they have to shoulder a great tax burden. So it cannot be that only large companies take on the responsibility of taxation when there are small or medium-sized companies that have the ability. But the Ministry of Finance and the tax department and customs have done a great job, and we must recognize this. The informal sector. Also, we need clear rules to be able to operate in the long term. And also, I want to talk about the point of consultations, and this happens in the Legislative Assembly. And I want to give you an example. And we're very proud of what we've done in AmCham. We've been a driving force behind the data protection law and cybersecurity law. But there are 6 months given for the implementation of the data protection and privacy law. Of these 6 months left, 3 months are for the creation of the Cybersecurity Institute and to create its regulations. So the productive sector only has 3 months to implement the law. So how are we going to implement a data protection law in 3 months with standards we do not know yet that will be issued by the Cybersecurity Institute? If the regulations are not yet done, we sent out letters stating that the implementation time was too short. And that's the predictability we asked for. Thank you. Well, I'd like to explain the sale of Torres that's still undergoing. the non-regulatory process of approval. But to be brief, there are two important trends in the telecommunications industry. One of them is the consolidation of the sector through acquisitions by fewer players with a better service to the end customer. And the end is the focus, the companies that make towers, because telecommunication companies increasingly need them, and more investment is needed. It is estimated that between 2024 and 2030, there'll be a 200% increase in traffic. So investment is needed in an ongoing manner. In order to generate investment, you need operational efficiency. How do you get there? We need to focus on infrastructure, and really the tower companies will carry out the necessary development.
Sean,
There's also the
desde la perspectiva city, ¿cuáles son
there's also the
los
perspective
desafíos
of
y
city.
oportunidades
Sean, what are
para
the
los
challenges and
inversores que ven
opportunities
ustedes?
for investors that
Bueno, mira,
you
yo creo que,
see?
como mencioné,
Well,
yo creo
look,
que este
I think that
gobierno está muy
as I
enfocado en
mentioned,
mejorar
this
el
government
clima de
is very
inversión y esto es
focused on
clave.
improving
Obviamente, yo
the
creo que
investment
muchos
climate, and
inversionistas
this is key,
tienen que tener
obviously.
mucha confianza en las
Investors
instituciones,
need to have
¿no?
confidence
En el
in the
derecho de Estado
institutions,
y
in
los
the rule of
procesos
law,
jurídicos, ¿no?
and legal
Yo creo que
processes.
para muchas empresas
I
que
think
están
that
mirando a
for
América
many
Latina, obviamente
companies that are
temas como
looking
la
at Latin
burocracia, la
America,
corrupción,
issues
son
like
obstáculos
bureaucracy
para muchos
and
países en
corruption
América
are
Latina. Pero yo creo
obstacles
que el enfoque de este
in many
gobierno
countries in Latin
de
America, but I believe
realmente
that the government's
hablar el mismo
approach
lenguaje
to
que el
speak the
sector
same
privado es
language
clave,
as the
¿no?
private sector is
Yo creo
key.
que este gobierno ha hecho un muy buen
I
trabajo
think
en
that the
vender
government
a El
has done
Salvador en
a
el
wonderful
exterior.
job
Yo
in
creo que
selling El
trabajando con el
Salvador
sector
abroad
privado allá
and
y también
working with the
empresarios de El
private
Salvador en
sector
Estados Unidos
and
para
the
promover
business
aún
sector in
más
El
el país
Salvador.
es sumamente
In the United
importante. Y yo
States, the
verdaderamente
country
creo
has
que hay
been
una buena
promoted a great
oportunidad
deal.
para El
I think
Salvador de
there is
aprovechar
a great
el
opportunity for El Salvador
nearshoring,
to
¿no?
take
Nosotros
advantage
en
of
los próximos años
nearshoring in
el
the
conflicto
next few
comercial con
years. The
China se
trade
va a
conflict
poner
with
mucho más
China
duro
is
y yo creo
going
que América
to
Latina y El Salvador
get
está bien
a lot
posicionada
tougher, and
para
I believe Latin
aprovechar
America
de
and El
eso.
Salvador are well
Gracias,
positioned to
Sean.
take
Y
advantage
Rodrigo,
of
vamos a
this. Thank you,
terminar con
Sean.
vos.
And
Además de esa
Rodrigo, let's
pregunta, los
finish with
desafíos,
you.
quisiera
In addition
preguntarte,
to the
mirando
question
hacia
of
el futuro, ¿qué
challenges, I'd
acciones
like to
consideras
ask you,
esenciales?
looking
Se hablaba
into the
mucho del
future,
diálogo
what
público-privado.
actions do you
¿Qué
consider
tipo de
essential? There's
alianzas
been a
y
lot of
acciones se
talk about the
necesitan hacia el
public-private
futuro? Y
dialogue.
también
What kind of
un
partnerships
poco
and actions are
adelantando
needed
los
for the
temas del
future?
próximo panel.
And just
Muchas
to get ahead a
gracias. Ya
little
veo que
bit
a mí siempre me
with
tocan dos
respect to
preguntas
the
en una.
topics of the
Pero
next
bueno,
panel.
comenzando
Thank
por la
you
primera,
very
los
much.
desafíos que se pueden encontrar
Now,
ahorita.
with
Y ya
respect
lo
to
mencionaban de
the
cierta manera acá los
challenges,
panelistas también con quien
it was already
acompaño este
mentioned
panel.
here by the
Pero yo lo
panelists
resumo a esto.
who
Es
are
muy
on this panel.
importante
In short,
podernos
it is
cambiar los
important to be
lentes
able to
y dejar
change
de verlo a
our
través de la política
perspective
y comenzar a verlo a través de lo
and
económico
look
o
at
de lo
this not
técnico.
just as a
Porque
political matter,
yo
but
me he
as an
sentado con algunos
economic or
inversionistas
technical matter.
extranjeros,
I've
bueno,
sat down with foreign
bastantes en estos
investors,
meses,
well, quite a
y
few
algunos de
in
ellos me dicen,
recent months, and
pero ¿y
some
es
of them
cierto
tell
esto,
me,
esto y esto?
It's
No,
true,
no,
or is
no.
this true?
Pero es cierto esto, esto y esto.
No, no,
No,
no. Is
no,
this
no.
true? Is this
Con
true? No,
datos, con
no.
respaldo. Entonces, ¿qué es lo
Data,
que sucede y cuál es
data.
el
So
reto que
what's
nosotros
going
tenemos al
on? What
final
is the
como país?
challenge that we have as a
Que si nosotros estamos
country?
en el ámbito económico,
If we're talking about the
sepamos que
economic
estamos en el ámbito
sphere,
económico,
then
no
we're
en
in
el
the
político.
economic sphere, not in the
Y
political
dejemos a los
sphere.
políticos en lo político.
And let's leave
Porque si no, muchas
politicians in
veces
their
esto termina
sphere,
manchando para
because
la
if
misma persona
not,
que
then
está,
this
digamos, de alguna manera
can
desinformando o alterando un dato.
tarnish what's
Porque al
going
final esta misma
on.
persona es la que
We
se
can
acerca conmigo y
provide
me dice cómo hacemos para revertir este
misinformation
mensaje.
without
Bueno,
wanting
pero ustedes mismos
to.
lo
We can distort the
impulsaron.
message.
Entonces al final no estamos acá para tener
We're
una
not
discordia, no estamos
here
acá para estar en
to
esos dimes que te diré eso,
be
o en
in
esa aclaración de
discord
datos, sino
or
mejor
create
trabajemos juntos desde el inicio
disagreement. Let's work
y
together
quedémonos en el
from
ámbito
the
económico,
outset,
que es el ámbito
and
que nos
let's
respecta a
focus on the
nosotros.
economic
Así
sphere,
que yo creo
which
que ese es
is
un desafío
our
muy grande,
sphere. I think
poder
it's an
aclarar muchos
enormous
datos, poder
challenge to be
mostrar al
able to
país tal cual,
clarify data
poder
and
demostrarle
show
al
the
mundo
country
de los
as it
beneficios de invertir en
is
El
and
Salvador
demonstrate
y
to the
no
world the
solamente de
benefits
los
of
mensajes que
investing
algunas
in El
veces, no
Salvador,
siempre, son los
and
que se
not
tratan de impulsar hacia afuera.
only
Porque al
messages
final
that
nos
are
beneficia
being
a todos. Si al país le
promoted
va bien, a todos nos va bien. Si al país le va
toward
mal, a todos nos va mal.
others
Al
in
final el
abroad.
inversionista lo que va a hacer es simplemente irse de este
If
país
we
a
are
otro
not
o dejar de ver
promoting
a El
ourselves
Salvador como
honestly,
una prospección
investment
de inversión
prospects
y ver
will
hacia otro lado.
go
¿qué es lo que
elsewhere.
nosotros tenemos que hacer? Darle la
What we
información
have
clara,
to
tal cual.
do is
Ese
give
es el desafío.
real and clear
Ahora,
information.
siempre va a
That's the
haber
challenge
ruido
now.
en
Now,
el
there's always going to
panorama,
be
siempre van a haber mensajes
noise on the
alterados y lo que nos
landscape
toca a nosotros
and
y el
distorted
desafío, por eso lo hablo desde la
messages.
perspectiva de la Agencia de
And
Promoción de Inversión del
so,
país, es estar aclarando
from the
todos estos
perspective of the country's
todos
investment
estos
promotion
mensajes.
agency, we
Ahora,
need
si se
to
trabaja desde un
clarify
inicio
these
con la
messages.
empresa privada,
If
que es lo
you
que yo he
work
llegado
from
desde
the
el primer día
outset
a
with the
tratar de hacer,
private
ya tenemos
sector, which is
lazos
I've
muy
been doing
estrechos.
from day one, we
AmCham,
already
por
have
ejemplo,
very
un
close
aliado
ties with
esencial. Nosotros hemos
AmCham,
estado
for
trabajando de la mano
example.
con ellos y todas las
AmCham is
empresas
an
que
essential
están trabajando
ally.
también
We've been
dentro o
working
están
hand in
dentro
hand
de
with
AmCham.
them and
Y
other
así con otras
companies
organizaciones,
and
cámaras, etcétera, de El
other
Salvador. Entonces, mi mensaje
organizations
también es,
and
estamos de puertas
chambers.
abiertas, hablamos
My
y aquí
message
fusiono un
is
poco la
that
pregunta
our
número uno con la
doors
dos.
are
Estamos hablando
open
cuáles son a futuro
and
las
we're
perspectivas.
looking at
Yo no
future
diría, y no por
perspectives.
escucharme político
Um,
de alguna manera, pero yo diría que el futuro ya
And I
comenzó.
would say
¿Por qué?
that the
Porque este
future is
acercamiento, estas
now,
alianzas
because
estrechas,
this
estas mesas
rapprochement, these
compartidas de trabajo
close
ya las estamos
partnerships,
teniendo, ya las
these
tenemos instaladas
shared
con diferentes cámaras,
working
con diferentes
groups, we have
organizaciones,
this with
con
different
empresas
organizations,
directamente.
chambers of commerce,
Entonces, ¿qué es lo que nos
companies
toca?
directly.
Seguir
So what
trabajando de
do
esa
we have
manera.
to do to
¿Por qué?
continue
Y
to
le voy a
work
comentar
in
una
this way?
experiencia que esto viene
Why? I'm
como
going
un
to tell you
beneficio
about an
al
experience
país.
that is a
Hace
benefit
no
to our
más de un
country.
mes,
It's
nosotros
about a
nos
month ago,
reuníamos,
we
embajadora,
met
buenos días, no la había
with
visto, lo siento, porque también la
the
involucra a usted esta
ambassador.
noticia.
Oh, good
Venía
morning. I
una
hadn't seen you. I'm
empresa
sorry, because this
internacional
news
de
has to
Estados
do
Unidos,
with
no
you.
voy a
It
decir el
involves
nombre,
an
pero
international
usted
company
me
from the United
escribía y
States.
me
I
enviaba
won't
a
say
esta
the name,
empresa
but you wrote
bastante
me
grande,
and
tecnológica,
sent me
de
to the company.
logística, de
It's a
distribución de
large
paquetes. Prácticamente ya dije el nombre
package
de quién estamos hablando,
distribution
pero
logistics company. I've already really described the company
exactamente,
we're talking
tiene al
about.
final una palabra fresh,
And
pero bueno.
so it's
El
really
punto es que
a
se acercaba
fresh
a Invest.
perspective.
¿Y qué sucedió?
But
En Invest tenía yo
in
a
Invest,
la mayoría, si no todas las instituciones
I
públicas
had
que tienen
all
que ver con
public
ese tema.
institutions
Estaba el
there that
Ministerio
have
de
to do
Economía,
with this
estaba
matter, the
Aduana,
Ministry of the
estaba CEPA,
Economy,
y eso,
Customs,
una reunión. Al
others.
día siguiente,
And
en
the
conjunto con
next
nosotros,
day, there was a
estaban reuniéndose
meeting,
con empresas
and
grandes de
there were
logística en El
different
Salvador, empresas
logistics
que incluso están
companies
dentro de
meeting,
AmCham. ¿Por qué? Porque le
countries that are
trabajamos en
part of
conjunto.
AmCham.
Y ahora
And
nos decía
why?
la
Because
persona
we've been
representante de
working
la empresa que
together.
había venido a ver el
And
ecosistema en El
so
Salvador,
the
en
companies
ninguno
that
de
have
los
come to
países que
see
me
the
he sentado
ecosystem in El
he tenido
Salvador,
a todas las instituciones en la misma
and
mesa.
in none of the
Nada que le
countries
voy
where
a
I've
contestar
sat down,
mañana, la otra
I've
semana,
never
sino
had
ahí
this
mismo.
where we've had
Ahorita le
all
estoy dando la
institutions at
respuesta.
the same
Pero ¿qué
table.
pasa con el tema aduanal?
And I'm
Aquí
not going to
está,
answer you tomorrow, next week.
contestando
No,
la respuesta.
now.
Pero ¿qué
I'm
pasa con
giving
el
you
tema de
the
zonas
answer
francas? Aquí está el
now.
Ministerio de
What's going
Economía
on with the free
contestando la
trade
respuesta.
zones? Well,
Mire,
here's the
pero ¿y la
Ministry
empresa
of the
privada?
Economy. They can give
Ahí
you
está
an
el
answer
empresario
now.
privado
What's
contestando cómo
going on with the
funciona,
private
cuáles son los
sector?
beneficios, cómo podrían
Well, what
trabajar
are
en
the
conjunto con
benefits?
esta
How
nueva
can we
empresa que
work
podría venir a El
together with this
Salvador.
new company that
Entonces, al
wants to
final, si
come
nos
to El
damos cuenta, es un
Salvador?
trabajo que
So
tenemos
if
que
we
hacer
realize that
unidos,
what's going on,
articuladamente.
we
¿Por qué?
need to
No
work
solo porque esta
jointly,
persona pueda replicar
not
en el
only
exterior y
because
decir que El
this
Salvador es el único país
person
donde he
can
tenido
go
sentado a
abroad
todo
and
el
say,
gobierno contestándole
well,
preguntas
this
en
is the
tiempo
only
real,
country
o
where
que
I've
el
gone
gobierno
and
está
met
trabajando
with
tan de la mano con
all
la empresa
ministries at
privada,
the same
sino que
time
también porque al
with the
final esos
entire
frutos
government.
los va a ver, o el
Rather,
beneficio lo va a
they're
ver el
going
pueblo
to
salvadoreño, que al final
be
es lo que nosotros estamos
benefits, not
buscando.
just for them, but
Así que
for
ese
us,
es lo que
for the
vemos a futuro,
Salvadoran
perdón por el
people.
tiempo.
And
Gracias, no,
that is
gracias
what
a
we
este
hope to do
ilustre
in the
panel.
future.
Ha sido un
Thank
placer
you
conversar
so
con
much.
ustedes.
Thank you for
Invito
the
al escenario
illustrious
a Mark
panel.
López,
Now,
exdirector
I'd
del
like to
Banco
invite to the
Interamericano de
stage Mark
Desarrollo,
Lopez, the former
también
director
la
from
embajadora
the
Milena
Inter-American
Mayorga
Development
y
Bank,
Jaime
Ambassador
Roberto Díaz del
Milena
Banco
Mayorga,
Centroamericano
and
y Comercio
Jaime
Económico.
Roberto Diaz
Gracias.
from the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. Thank you.
Probando. Ahora sí. Muchas gracias. Bienvenida, embajadora.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Ambassador and Jaime. My first question goes to the ambassador. You've heard the other panelists. You're inside Washington. You're in the United States. interacting with the community there. From your perspective, how do you see this and how do you sell the country and its opportunities to American countries, to American companies? Good morning. Thank you to the Atlantic Council, who has always been very open to working with El Salvador, and thanks to the people at CAF who are supporting us with a number of projects in the United States. I'd like to respond saying that when President Bukele appointed me as an ambassador to the U.S., I began to meet with a number of different institutions, not just government agencies, but private institutions as well, to get to know the challenges, understand what I would be facing once I got to the U.S. But when I got there, it was the pandemic. So it was a very difficult time. And we began to work intensively on removing that whole cocktail diplomacy and instead focusing on trade diplomacy, because that's what really produces results for the country. We conducted 35 trade missions from the embassy. We've knocked on doors. I traveled all over the United States, of course, going to states like Texas and California, whose economies are very powerful, so that I could bring delegations. And we've been able to take a number of delegations to El Salvador. And as Rodrigo from Invest said, we've brought large companies too that are now seeing El Salvador differently, because in the end, my emphasis was on changing the government rhetoric of the US government, because I wanted to attract investments, but politically we were being beat up a bit. So that was one of the conversations I had with you, because obviously what an investor fears is, how am I going to go to a country if I'm hearing bad things about them all the time? But we continued with our investment agenda, and we were able to secure major agreements, for instance, with Google. And it was during the pandemic that we were able to get Google to give us licenses so that we could keep our education system working during that time. And then they saw how effectively El Salvador works, and we've been working on other projects, and we're really serving as an example to other countries. President Bukele is always at the vanguard. He's innovative, and we've worked on eliminating red tape. We've worked on shortening timelines, and in the area of investment, we're seeking to repatriate capital, not just bringing human capital home, that's very important, but also financial capital of Salvadorans living all over the country. We've got $1 billion in investments from Salvadorans living abroad, and they've supported different businesses that they're developing, not just in the towns where they're from originally, but also in Sur City, La Union. They're building medium density hotels. One of the ones that I helped open, they were saying it was valued at $3 million. Now it's a $5 million investment. So we can't forget that Salvadorans around the world are also contributing enormously to the Salvadorian economy, not just by sending remittances. No, like now we use the dignified term of partners for development when we refer to them. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now, from the CABE, you've been working here for a long time. How do you see the priorities vis-a-vis the Salvadorian government, and what specific areas are you working in? Thank you so much, Mark. It's really a pleasure to answer your question, because we see El Salvador as a key part of the productive renaissance of the Central American region. We need to acknowledge that production worldwide is changing, and countries can either wait for things to get better, or they can make decisions to be leaders. And that's what's happening in El Salvador. At the Central American Bank, we're saying that Salvadorian growth is partially coming out of Central American growth. 35% of its exports go to the US, 35 go to Guatemala and Honduras. So for us, as the oldest bank of the region, It's important to be a stabilizing factor and to ensure that that growth is equitable according to our charter. Now, what have been the priority areas where we've addressed the government's needs? As the minister said, there is a clear need for infrastructure at two levels. One, connectivity. And on that subject, I have to tell you that we have mobilized the largest financing project from the Korean Export Bank, Kexim Bank, in the Los Soros corridor with more than $400 million in infrastructure, which will help connect the Atlantic corridor to Acajutla. And that is going to translate into lower costs for production, more productivity gains for trade. And of course, that's a benefit to the Central American region. But two, we also have the La Chadura bridge, the bridge to Guatemala, where we see a lot of the region's trade going through. We can't stop focusing on productive infrastructure and seeing how we can increase capacity and trade facilitation for El Salvador. But number two, I think it was mentioned before me, the capacity for productive supply requires new skills. And I have to recognize and thank both the CAF and the Atlantic Council for the fact that we're holding this event in a library, because this is the second strategic focus that we have, which is human capital. For instance, during the pandemic, we helped with the digital divide, so people didn't have to stop learning that so they could have access to education. But now we're contributing through the project Mi Nueva Escuela, and next year we'll have more than 100 schools being built, which we are financing with bank funding. They're highly concessional loans for poor areas, but human capital has another component, which is sports. We are contributing for the rehabilitation of sports centers. We issued the first sports bond. So these are the kinds of strategic angles that we're focusing on, along with the Bukele government, so that the productive sector can say, yes, we have the human capital we have available. We've got SMEs that can grow, and the technology sector has the capacity to export services as well. And we have our tourism sector. Excellent. So another question for you, Jaime, on education. I understand that you are working with the government of Germany and with the European Union on a project called Dinamica, which is helping local entrepreneurs to help close the gap between supply and demand for companies that need a certain kind of specialized workforce. How is Kabay going to work with these groups in the future? And what is your perspective on that supply demand gap in terms of human capacity? Thank you. Well, truly for us, it's one of the most important constraints to growth, this lack of talent in the Central American region. New companies need that. We've heard it from a number of people, whether it's in tourism or technology. So it's a never-ending agenda. We had a major partnership with the European Union and the German government through the KfW. They're not bank members, but we have a very active line of work with them, which enables us to focus on a very specific sector like SMEs and venture capital, which is the most scarce type here. And just to give you an idea and perhaps an analogy, what happens with the SMEs, it's like I don't really know the right word, like a atomizer, I guess that's the best translation I can come up with, where 90% of Salvadorians have a business idea, but only about 20% can actually turn it into a business that is profitable. And it's even harder to get them to be established. That's what entrepreneurs call the valley of death, how to get an idea into a product. And so, Mark, here in Salvador, something that I find is surprising. We've got the second highest investment in R&D in terms of GDP. But we have great talent outside of the country, as the ambassador said. So with the European Union, we were saying, let's work with the ecosystem. We're working with 11 business development centers. We're working with about $2 million that have already been dispersed. There'll be 2.8 million more in the next year. We have a portfolio of $2.8 million in execution. We expect to still grow. And those 2 millions are for businesses that were ideas and that needed to be implemented and that we were helping. So this is in the tourism sector, manufacturing, and we hope to use those business development centers to see businesses actually get established and change the dynamics.
Excellent. Thank you. In the last panel, digital connectivity was talked about, and the CAF president, Sergio Díaz Granados, also talked about the $145 million underwater cable project. So I imagine that they are looking for complementary investments for this kind of package, since it's a technology-based infrastructure. How to attract these complementary investments, and how to think about other kinds of emerging sectors for U.S. investment. I'm glad you've gone to the U.S. and states like Texas. The U.S. is not like just one country. There are several economies. Well, I've met many chambers of Congress because I think it's very important. They need us to help them. We want to talk about the good news, what's going on in El Salvador, because it's difficult to spread the word. And I think this is an essential part of our work when companies start to increase their investment in El Salvador because they are good partners, and so are we, and that's the story we need to tell them. But at a government level, we've been working with local and state governments. We have brought delegations of congressmen from Nevada. We're going to organize for 2025 an interesting exchange. We're interested in the hotels and casinos they have. We need to learn from the United States what it can offer us in different sectors or states. Something that has really helped us is that El Salvador is seen as a pioneer in the field of cryptocurrency. I can't stop talking about it. Bitcoin has allowed us to have a fresh face. El Salvador is seen as an innovative and assertive country. And with this Bitcoin ecosystem, many companies have looked toward El Salvador. We've created a number of legal frameworks so that technology companies come to the country. As I mentioned, we need to prepare our workforce for this, to be able to support this technology market. And we're going to have brilliant minds coming from other countries as well. At the same time that we train our people, we have the platforms. As mentioned, we have new schools that can help us have the necessary human capital to continue to grow. What I believe is that the decisions of President Bukele have not only helped us in markets like Bitcoin. We have organized 4 conferences in El Salvador. The last one was attended by 1,000 people, mostly foreigners. Tourism conferences. People are seeing El Salvador in a different way. These were published in magazines and newspapers. People have come here to know more about Bitcoin, and Bitcoiners are also our best partners because they're promoting and talking about what is going on in El Salvador.
negociaciones
now
en el
we've
Fondo Monetario, entre
undertaken
otros. El
some
presidente sabe realmente
negotiations
para
at
dónde
the
va y creo
International
que ese
Monetary
entusiasmo que
Fund.
genera en
The
las nuevas
president really
generaciones
knows where we
es
need to
muy
go,
bueno.
and I think this
También quiero
enthusiasm
agregar
has been
que en
very
el tema
positive.
de
I
intercambio
also
comercial
wanted
con
to
Estados
add,
Unidos, a
with
veces hay
respect to
mucho
trade with
desconocimiento,
United
incluso los
States,
tratados
a lot of times
de
there
libre comercio que
is
tenemos,
a lot
las
of
ventajas de la
ignorance about the
cercanía,
free
la
trade
logística,
treaties
como El
that
Salvador
we
está
have,
también
the
haciendo su
advantages
esfuerzo
of El
para
Salvador's
firmar incluso
logistics, since we're very
acuerdos,
close.
por ejemplo, con su IVP para mejorar el tema de aduanas. Somos
Agreements
pioneros en
to
darle también las
improve the
condiciones a Estados
customs
Unidos para
issue,
poder tener un
agreements with
intercambio que nos ayude
CBP.
en un ganar-ganar. Estamos ahora
And
también
so
en
we believe this
conversaciones
is an
para
exchange that
Global
is a
Entry, es decir, El
win-win.
Salvador
We're
está
also
adelante y nosotros
undertaking
tenemos la
negotiations with
ventaja
respect to
que
global
tenemos
entry.
gobernabilidad y
El
entonces, por ejemplo, el
Salvador
caso
is
de
ahead of the
Starlink,
curve,
fuimos de los primeros en
and we
Latinoamérica de
are
tenerlo,
one of the
pero tuvimos
first
que ir
countries in
aquí a
Latin
la Asamblea
America
Legislativa a que nos
to
ayudaran
have
con todo el tema de la
Starlink,
regulación
but we had
de
to
Internet satelital
also
y eso es la
have the
ventaja de El
legislative
Salvador en ese
assembly
momento,
set
que la
up internet
población ha
regulation.
despertado, le ha
And this
dado
is
el
the
presidente
advantage
el
of El Salvador.
acompañamiento
The
a través de la
population
Asamblea
has
Legislativa,
woken up.
que es
The
donde también
president
pues se
has
trabaja de la
given it
mano y
his
podemos
support
salir
through the
adelante en muchos
legislative
temas.
assembly,
Muchas
and we're working
gracias.
hand in hand to move
Jaime,
forward. Thank you
comentarios
very
para cerrar
much.
la
Jaime,
conversación.
do you have
Sí,
any
no, muchas
closing
gracias. La verdad es
comments to
que
make? Thank you
escuchando
very
realmente
much.
solo reafirmar
Just
que creo que
having
El Salvador
listened to
tiene un
what was
liderazgo
said, I
importante en
want
la
to
región en
reiterate that
cuanto
El
a buscar estas
Salvador
nuevas economías y darle la
is
estabilidad
really
a estas
leading in
nuevas
the region
empresas
in terms
que
of
tienen
these
apuestas
new
de
economic
largo plazo,
sectors,
¿verdad? Creo que el tema
and it
tecnológico,
is providing
creo que todo el tema
stability
de
to
la
new
manufactura,
companies
el tema
in the long
de
term,
turismo me parece
both
fascinante. O sea,
in the technological
les voy a decir
sector
por
and
qué,
the
porque en el
manufacturing
PCIA hicimos
sector.
un
I think
estudio
the subject of
de
tourism is
cuál fue el
fascinating. I'm
impacto de
going to tell
turismo en
you
los
why.
países miembros.
We did a
Y
study on the
después del COVID,
impact of tourism in member
después de
countries
Dominicana,
after
hay una
COVID,
curva J. Todos los
and
países tuvieron una caída en turismo,
there
luego se
was
cerró, se fue el
a
lockdown y se
drop in
cerraron todas
tourism.
los
This,
vuelos.
of course, was due to the
Y
lockdown, and
Dominicana y El
all
Salvador pegaron
flights were
un
canceled.
salto
And the
de vuelta,
Dominican Republic and El Salvador
24% por encima, por encima de
then
la base. Y Dominicana
hit
alrededor de
a
35%, pero Dominicana es un sector que le
point
ha costado.
where then they were
Y
able to
entonces cuando
turn
uno
it
mira esos
around
síntomas de
completely.
una economía
And
que puede
when we look
transitar
at
a otros
this
sectores
economy
fácilmente,
that
yo creo que
can
es momento de
then
apostarles. Y el
transition to
PCIE
other sectors, I think
quiere
it's
ser
time to
parte de
bet
ese
on them.
desarrollo y seguir
And
trabajando
CABE
con
wants to
aliados
be
al
part of
desarrollo. Que
that
hablamos de la Unión
development.
Europea,
We
hablamos del
want to work with
KfW.
development
Yo realmente
partners.
aplaudo el
We're
trabajo que se hizo
talking
con la
with
CAF
the
y con
European
el EFC
Union
hace poco con el For
and
Nature Swap. Y
also
yo creo que tenemos
talking
oportunidades de
about
hacer
KF.
conjuntamente ahora que
I
la CAF está
applaud the work that
dentro
has been done
para poder
by
movilizar
CAF,
todas las
and
inversiones de
the
infraestructura que se
IDFC
necesita.
has
Tal
recently
vez en términos,
helped us
ya
do
en mi
the
sombrero economista, uno debería estar
swap
invirtiendo alrededor de
nature
un 2%,
swap, and I
tal
believe
vez
that there
3
are
dice por ahí, yo
opportunities
soy
to
un
do
poco
business
averso a ese
together.
número, pero 3%
Um,
de infraestructura.
and
La ventaja es que uno
I
la puede
think
ver.
that we
Cuando
need to
nosotros vamos a
think
ver el
about
viernes,
different
tenemos una misión
numbers.
para ir a ver el puente de
The
la Chagua,
3% of
que es un puente de
infrastructure
primer nivel, una aduana
advantage, and
integrada.
we have
Yo he
this
pasado por el acuerdo,
bridge
así
that
que
we're talking
yo los
about,
aplaudo que
Achichuela
puedan hacer todo
Bridge.
este tipo de
And
inversiones.
so I
Y más
applaud
de estos
these
proyectos tenemos que
investments. We
aprovechar.
need
Y
more of
como
these projects.
último
And
remark es que
my
ojalá
last
podamos ver
remark
que
is
El
that
Salvador,
I
como decía
hope
nuestra
that in
presidenta
El
Gisela Sánchez,
Salvador,
que pueda
as
ser
our President Quetzalá
parte de
Sanchez
ese
says,
engranaje clave
that we
de
can
la
be
transformación
a key
positiva de
element in the
Centroamérica.
positive
Muchas gracias.
transformation of Central America.
Bueno, muchas
Thank you
gracias
very
a los dos
much. Thank you
panelistas.
to
Ya sé
our
que
two
estamos a tiempo.
panelists.
Me gustaría
We are right
agradecerles,
on
Salvadora,
time. I'd
Jaime,
like
y
to
quiero
thank
invitar a Cristina
the
Sinelli
ambassador
del
and
CAF para
Jaime,
nuestras palabras
and
de
I would like
clausura.
to invite Kristen Asinelli from the CAF to come up.
¿Se escucha? Sí. Muy buenos
Can you hear
días
me?
a todos y
Good
todas.
morning,
La verdad
everyone.
que un saludo
The
muy
truth is
especial
that
bueno,
I
a todo el
would
equipo de El
like
Salvador que nos
to
estuvieron acompañando, ministra,
provide special
secretario de
thanks
Comercio,
to
obviamente a
everyone,
Jason
the different
del Atlantic Council, que fue un
ministers,
poco
the team from El
el mentor de
Salvador,
esta
Jason
actividad
from
junto
Atlantic
con el
Council,
equipo de CAF,
who
pero que
organized
nos
this
trajo hasta
activity
aquí,
with
a
the
esta
CAF
mañana que
team. They
creo
brought
ha
us here this
sido
morning,
sumamente
and I
productiva
believe this has
en
been
este
a very
trabajo
productive
con
meeting.
Citi, con AmCham,
Work with
Milicom,
City,
bueno, la
AmCham,
embajadora de
Milcom,
El Salvador
the ambassador of El
Unidos,
Salvador to the United States, Mark
obviamente,
Lopez,
Jaime,
obviously,
la
Jaime.
verdad que es un placer
The
poder
truth
trabajar
is, it's
con
a
el Banco
pleasure to be able to work
Centroamericano
with
en
the
conjunto,
Central
la
American Bank
institución más
jointly, the
antigua de desarrollo
oldest
que está aquí en
development
Centroamérica y
institution here
nosotros
in Central
como Banco de
America.
Desarrollo
And
nuevo
we, as a
en la
new
institución,
development bank, a new
aprendiendo
institution,
de lo que han
we
estado
are
haciendo
learning from
ustedes
what
y de
you
nuevo
have been
tratando de
doing,
encontrar
and we are trying to
espacios de trabajo en
find
conjunto,
new
porque lo
joint
que
spaces
hace
to work
falta para
together
el
in this
desarrollo de un
country,
país como El
because what
Salvador
is
es
needed
muchísimo y lo
for the
podemos hacer si
development
lo
of the
hacemos de
El
manera unida.
Salvador
Por
is
eso
a
la
great deal,
importancia de
and we
que
need to
Jaime nos
work
estés
together.
acompañando
And that's why it's so important Jaime
en
is
esta
here with
mañana que, como
us
decía,
this morning.
resalto
As I was
eh,
saying,
los
I'd
logros
like
que
to highlight
hemos
the
escuchado de los
achievements that
distintos
we've
panelistas
heard from
hablando
the
de
different
temas de
panelists who
el
have
panorama
spoken
económico,
about
las
issues
oportunidades
such
de
as the
desarrollo
economic
que
outlook,
tiene este
development
país fruto de las reformas
opportunities
que está
that the
llevando
country
adelante el
has thanks to
presidente
the
Bukele.
reforms
Y ya
implemented
nuestro
by
presidente
President
ejecutivo
Bukele,
Sergio Díaz
and
Granado
our
hizo
executive
mucho
president
hincapié
Sergio
en
Diaz
inversiones
Granado
específicas que venimos
emphasized
haciendo
specific
desde CAF
investments
como
that
Banco de
we have been
Desarrollo, pero a mí
making
quizás me
in
gustaría
CAF as a development
resaltar
bank. What I would
brevemente,
like to
primero, que
briefly
el ingreso
highlight
de El
is
Salvador ha sido una
El
excelente noticia, una
Salvador's
tremenda
membership
noticia
in
para lo
CAF,
que es
which
el
is
ADN
excellent
de nuestra
news
institución, que es la
for the
integración
DNA of
regional.
our institution,
En un
which is
momento que
regional
se ha hablado aquí,
integration.
donde el mundo está incierto
At a
con las guerras comerciales,
time
las
like
guerras
this,
que
when the
vemos
world is very
de distintos
uncertain,
países, los problemas de
wars
migración,
and trade wars,
que
migration
un
problems,
país como El
a
Salvador
country
se
such as
una
El
a una
Salvador,
institución como
the
CAF,
fact
que
that it
como decía
would
Sergio
become a
Díaz
member of an
Granados, empezó
institution
pequeña
like
con los
CAF,
países
as
andinos y
Sergio
hoy está ya
Diaz-Canado
en
said,
25
CAF
países de
began
América
as a
Latina
small
y el
Andean
Caribe, y que se ha
development
vuelto un
bank, and
bien
now
público
it has
regional
25
para
countries,
todos
countries
aquellos
in Latin America
latinoamericanos
and
y
the Caribbean.
latinoamericanas,
It's a
caribeños,
regional public
caribeñas, que
good
hacen parte
for the
de esta
region,
institución.
the LAC
Y en esta
region.
región,
And
que
in
es
this
una región
region,
de
which
paz
is
y
a
que
region of
tiene
peace,
todo para resolver
and
los
which
problemas mundiales.
it
Se
has
habló aquí
everything to solve the
específicamente de las
world's
cuestiones del
problems.
Salvador, pero si
We
vemos
talked about the
una
issues of
visión
El
más amplia
Salvador
regional,
here, but
sabemos
if we
que somos
take
una
a wider
de las
view,
regiones más
we
biodiversas del
know we are
planeta, que
one of
tenemos
the
el
most biodiverse
30%
regions
del
in
agua
the
dulce, que
world.
quizás
We
está
have
mal distribuida y por
30%
eso se necesitan
of
más
the world's fresh
inversiones.
water, and it may
Tenemos
be poorly
todo para encarar
distributed,
la
these riches,
transición
which is why
energética
we need
justa que
more
necesitan nuestro país,
investments.
nuestros
We
países, pero también,
can
y se habló acá
have
muchísimo, el
a
talento humano.
successful
Talento
just energy
joven, talento
transition that
que
our
lo
country
encontramos,
needs. There's
no
a lot of
importa
discussion
en qué
about
parte
human talent,
de los
young
países, en qué
talent.
regiones, si en
And
regiones pobres,
so
regiones ricas, sabemos
we
de
have
ese talento
talent
tan
in the
importante que tiene
region,
nuestra
both
región,
in the
pero
poor
sabemos que ese
parts and the
talento
rich
también no
parts. We
está
know we have this
distribuido
talent,
de
but the
la mejor
talent
manera
is not
posible, necesita
distributed
más
evenly
oportunidades.
throughout the
Y aquí en El
region, and
Salvador,
our
y lo
talent
remarcó
needs more
claramente la
opportunities.
embajadora
Here
con las
in El
cuestiones de
Salvador,
innovación,
as
ese
the
talento joven
ambassador
tiene
said,
la posibilidad de encontrar un espacio
now
donde
young
desarrollarse.
talent has the
Nosotros, como Banco de
possibility
Desarrollo,
of developing
quisiéramos
itself.
también recalcar
As a
algo que
development bank,
también
we'd
la
like
embajadora lo
to
recalcó, que es la
highlight
rapidez
something that
con
the
que
ambassador
El
mentioned,
Salvador
which is
trabaja.
the speed with which El
En el caso
Salvador has
nuestro, en
worked.
3
In
meses,
our
El
case,
Salvador
in
estuvo
3
listo
months,
para
El
ingresar,
Salvador was ready to
que
become a
tardar
member
un
of
año, 2
our
idas,
institution. Usually,
vueltas,
these
acuerdos,
institutional
firmas.
processes take
Bueno,
2
Mark lo debe
years
saber
or
perfectamente
more
por
because
los
of the
temas del BID, etcétera. En
signatures
3
and
meses, El
other
Salvador
red
estuvo
tape.
listo para
In
sentarse en
3
el
months,
directorio
El
de la
Salvador
institución.
was ready to
Y
sit on the
nosotros,
board of
que con
directors
Sergio
of
Díaz
our
Granados decimos que
institutions.
trabajamos en una
And
institución que
with
tenemos 2
Sergio
velocidades,
Diaz-Granados,
rápido y
we
muy
say
rápido. La
we
verdad que El Salvador
work an
nos ganó porque
institution
fue
that has
hiper
2
rápido
speeds, fast and
y
very
se
fast.
convirtió en
And
el
the
miembro
truth is
que
that
lo
El
hizo de una manera
Salvador beat us because
sumamente
it was
rápida,
very, very
expeditiva.
fast
Y
and
no solamente
became
entró
a
rápido,
member
sino
in
que en 2
record
años ya
time.
tenemos una
And
cartera de
in
más de
2
600 millones de
years,
dólares
it
con
now
proyectos
has a
estratégicos en,
portfolio
lo decía
of
recién,
millions of dollars with
conectividad
strategic
regional, pero
projects
no solamente
in
conectividad
the
física, sino
area,
también
not
conectividad
only of
digital. Y eso es
connectivity,
clave para el
physical
desarrollo
connectivity, but
del
also
país y también
digital
para el
connectivity.
desarrollo
This
de
is
la
key for the
región.
country's
Por
development and for the
eso
region's
aquí se
development.
hablaron de temas
That
como
is why
seguridad, de
we talked about
confianza, de
matters such as
visión, de
security,
inversiones,
trust,
de
vision
reglas
of the
claras, de
future,
inversión pública,
government's clear rules for public investment. I was just speaking with a representative of AmCham. It has been 4.5 points of GDP. That is impressive. That is a state vision, a long-term vision, a vision of development. As a development bank, we work to implement long-term infrastructure projects and to improve the quality of public policy so that improves the quality of life of countries and their citizens. In the case of El Salvador, it's been exemplary. Now, I don't want to go on for too long. I want to emphasize the entire CAF management team is present here. Also thank the vice presidents, the general secretary, Alejandra Botero. There's Tony from the finance area. The whole management team has spent 2 days in El Salvador, all of them with finance ministers from Latin America and the Caribbean for 2 days. This shows us clearly that during this time and in the future, El Salvador will be a beacon for other countries in the region. CAF will continue to support all these reforms and the work the country has been doing. And again, I'm happy to be here sharing the spirit of integration that El Salvador has been promoting to the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean. So thank you very much, especially to Atlantic Council for the support and for allowing us to organize this conference. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much.